to victory.
Yes, y'all.
Let Africa be free. Advance to meet the foe. Advance to victory. With the might of the red, the black, and the green. My Jamaican brothers and sisters, good evening. My African brothers and sisters, in fact, brothers and sisters of all races and ethnicities that are hearing my voice on the live stream, good evening. I bring you greetings from the people of the Republic of Barbados, the world's youngest republic. Permit me to begin by greeting you with the immortal words of the motto of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. One God, one aim, one destiny. I would like to extend heartfelt thanks to the Irie FM radio station for inviting me to come to Jamaica and to be part of this wonderful event. What an honor and pleasure it is to be paying tribute to the great Marcus Garvey in the land of his birth. And what an intriguing assignment I have been given. They told me to address the issue of Jamaica doing away with the Queen of England as its head of state and becoming a republic. And I am to address that urgent issue within the context of paying tribute to Jamaica's first national hero, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Brothers and sisters, this is a very intriguing and pleasing assignment for me because it would not be an exaggeration to say that my entire career of political and cultural activism can be conceived as an oscillation, a movement between, on the one hand, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and on the other hand, Queen Elizabeth II of England. An oscillation that saw me embracing one and rejecting the other. Let me explain what I mean. In June of 1986, I was a young, newly minted lawyer and politician who was invited by the then Prime Minister of Barbados to serve his administration in the Senate. I readily consented, but when I went before the Governor General of Barbados to be sworn in as a senator, this is the oath I was required to take, and I quote, "I, David Andre Comissiong, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law, so help me God." Well, I nearly choked on those words. Imagine being required to be faithful and to bear true allegiance to the representative of an institution that had played such a leading role in the enslavement and colonial oppression of one's ancestors. We all know the history. The British trade in enslaved Africans commenced in 1562, when Queen Elizabeth I authorized John Hawkins to lead an expedition to the west coast of Africa to attack the towns and villages on the west coast of Africa and to enslave the African people. That was the beginning. And Queen Elizabeth I sent along her 700-ton vessel named Jesus of Lubeck. Thereafter, all of the English kings and queens, from King James I right down to King William IV, authorized, organized, invested, and profited from the transatlantic slave trade. But you know, back in 1986, I had no choice. If I wanted to be a senator, I was told I had to swear that oath. So I confess, I swore the oath back in 1986. I was 26 years old at the time. And then in 1987, 1 year later, the year of the centenary of Marcus Garvey, a group of Barbadian Pan-Africanists who were celebrating the centenary approached then young Senator David Comissiong, and asked him to come on board and give their celebration some parliamentary support. And I said, yes, I am coming. And I became deeply immersed in the study of Marcus Garvey. I studied the man, his career, his UNIA, his philosophy and opinions. And when the centenary year came to an end, I set up my own Pan-Africanist organization. And I started a weekly training program for members, in which the members were required to come to the podium, a podium like this, armed with a copy of the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey. They had to quote a passage from Philosophy and Opinions and expound upon it. And so, when in 1989, Queen Elizabeth II undertook a visit to Barbados to celebrate the 350th anniversary of the Barbados House of Assembly. The House of Assembly that in 1661 had enacted the infamous Barbados Slavery Code, the law that became the pattern for slave laws all across the hemisphere. When she came, the young Senator David Comissiong, having gone through the year of Marcus Garvey's centenary, I was prepared and ready for her visit. And what, you may ask, did I do? Well, I simply decided that I was going to boycott the Queen's events. I decided, for example, that I was not going to stand up in a line of senators waiting to shake the Queen's hand and to bow down to her. So that is a little, brothers and sisters, of my own personal background in relation to this duality or dichotomy of Marcus Garvey on the one hand and the Queen or monarch of England on the other hand. And it is a real duality. It is a real dichotomy because they represent two very different philosophies, two very different value systems and worldviews, two very different paths to the future for the black people of this world. Indeed, I told you about our weekly readings from Philosophy and Opinions. Well, one of our favorite Marcus Garvey quotes was taken from the story that Garvey himself told about his 1914 voyage when he was coming back from England to Jamaica. And Garvey said that while he was on that voyage, these thoughts came to his head. And I quote Garvey now. He said, "Where is the black man's government? Where is his king and kingdom? Where is his president, his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men of big affairs?" And then Garvey answered those questions and said, "I will help to make them." Another favorite quote was from the admonition that Garvey included in lesson 3 of his School of African Philosophy. And this is what he said, and I quote, "You can have your own king, your own emperor, your own pope, your own dukes, your own everything. Therefore, don't bow down to other races for recognition." End of quote. Brothers and sisters, 108 years ago, the great Marcus Garvey asked us, where is the black man's king or queen or president or head of state? Garvey was saying that the black man must have his own nation, his own state, and his own head of state. Now, how do we answer Garvey's questions in the year 2022? Could the answer be Queen Elizabeth II of Buckingham Palace in London, England? Well, I ask you to mentally file away that question for a bit while I reflect just a little longer on Barbados. For some 30-odd years after that 1989 royal visit to Barbados, I, along with a number of fellow Pan-Africanists and public intellectuals, undertook an unrelenting effort of public education around such issues as black studies, black economic enfranchisement, knowledge of our African history and identity, the need to unhinge our national court system from the colonial type control and authority of the British Privy Council. Republicanism, Pan-Africanism, reparations, and the list goes on. For years, we were out there lecturing and agitating. And of course, a constant theme was our insistence that having the Queen of England occupy that position as head of state of Barbados constituted a self-inflicted infringement on our national sovereignty. What is national sovereignty? National sovereignty is the power of a people to do everything necessary to govern themselves. Having the Queen in that position, we were inflicting an injury on our national sovereignty. We also said to Barbadians that this was a badge of shame, and that in our own self-interest, we Barbadians needed to get rid of that badge of shame. And so you could well imagine the joy and pride that I felt when, in the throne speech of 2020, the Mia Amor Motley administration determined that Barbadians had evolved to a stage where we could no longer countenance having a foreign English hereditary head of state, and that we were going to remove her. We had gotten rid of appeals to the British Privy Council back in 2005. And now we were going to be completing the mission of taking full control of our national sovereignty by removing the Queen of England from our governance arrangements. But of course, it was not plain sailing from there. As you would well imagine, a country like Barbados that had been subjected to uninterrupted British colonial rule from 1625 to 1966, a period of 341 years, a country like that was bound to have its fair share of Anglophiles who would try to derail this positive development. And for me, an Anglophile is a person who respects and loves Britain more than they respect and love themselves or their own country. We have some Anglophiles we have to be very careful with. And I had to go to war against some of these Anglophiles. And in a speech I delivered in July of last year, I addressed those Barbadian Anglophiles. And I think what I said then has a message for Jamaica, so I'm going to repeat it. This is what I said. I said, there are many reasons why it is right and necessary that our country must relieve itself of a foreign colonialism-based head of state and elevate one of our own sons or daughters to that exalted post. Firstly, colonialism is an unnatural state. It is an aberration that is to be avoided at all costs. There is absolutely nothing natural about one nation ruling another, one people ruling another people. There is also nothing natural about any nation having a head of state who is a native and a citizen of another nation. That is a thoroughly unnatural phenomenon. It is the unnatural fruit of colonialism. Indeed, just as the head of state of Germany is a German, the head of state of Japan is Japanese, the head of state of India is an Indian, the head of state of Britain is a British person. So too, the head of state of Barbados should be and must be a Bajan. Secondly, after serving as a Barbados diplomat for 3 years, it has become clear to me that our country, Barbados, is expected and is being called upon to play an important leadership role in international affairs, particularly in relation to defending the interests of the nations and peoples of the developing world, the vast black and brown majority of mankind. And so it is utterly incongruous, contradictory for Barbados to be stepping forward on the world stage as a leader of a community of nations that are all former European colonies, while at the same time, Barbados holds on to the monarch of its former colonial master as its head of state. Thank God, this contradictory state of affairs will soon be corrected. Let us ensure that whenever the nations and peoples of the world look at Barbados, they see nothing other than a sovereign, resilient, independent, and self-respecting nation. End of quote. That was the message I had for the Anglophiles in Barbados who were resisting the move to Republican status. And these 2 points go to the heart of the matter. Why should the head of state of Jamaica be anything other than a Jamaican? The head of state of a nation is that exalted public official who is deemed to symbolically represent the unity and the collective historical struggle and sense of purpose of the people of that nation. Who can identify with the struggle of the Jamaican people against slavery? Who can identify with Sam Sharp and Paul Bogle and the struggle in the 1930s? Furthermore, we are aware that Jamaica, ever since Jamaica gained its independence in 1962, Jamaica has had a succession of 7 native governors general. All of these governors general have been selected not by the Queen. They have been selected by the democratically elected Prime Minister of Jamaica and his or her cabinet of ministers. And it is these Jamaica-born and bred governors general who have in fact carried out all of the concrete governance functions that the Constitution of Jamaica ascribes to Queen Elizabeth II. And I dare say, these native-born and bred Jamaican governors general have all performed their duties with great integrity and distinction. So, can you tell me why then the head of state of Jamaica should be anything other than a Jamaican? But the second point is perhaps even more fundamental. What role do our nations intend to play in world affairs? And what must they do to equip themselves to play that role? In the case of Barbados, I can tell you that the decision to remove the Queen and replace her with our very own Barbadian president or head of state was not a singular, standalone development. Indeed, at the same time that we were removing the Queen, we were also removing the statue of Britain's slavery-loving Admiral Horatio Nelson from its place of prominence in Bridgetown, Barbados. And at the same time that we were removing the Queen, we were establishing Barbadian embassies in Ghana and Kenya. And we had determined that going forward as a nation and a people, that Africa was going to be the foremost direction that we will be moving in. So much so that right now, preparations are going on in Barbados for a massive Africa, Caribbean trade and investment forum that will start on the 31st of August and go to the 3rd of September. And hundreds of African businessmen and investors will be coming to Barbados. And it's not only for Barbados, it's for the whole Caribbean, but it's being hosted in Barbados. In addition, Prime Minister Motley and other members of her cabinet. At the same time we were removing the Queen, Prime Minister Motley and her ministers were engaging in multiple advocacy efforts on behalf of the developing world of black and brown nations and peoples. So, if the orientation and future course of our nation was going to be in that direction, how could we continue to present ourselves to the world as a nation that was still symbolically under the authority and tutelage of a Caucasian English monarch? It did not make sense. And permit me to say that Jamaica, like Barbados, has so much in terms of leadership and inspiration to offer to the other black and brown nations and peoples of the world. Indeed, just recently, all of us across the Caribbean were transfixed by the marquee event of the Commonwealth Games, the women's 100 meters final. And when that race was over and they were holding the medal ceremony, there, standing at the top of the podium, was Jamaica's Elaine Thompson-Herah. And 2 rungs below her was Britain's Daryl Nita. And there, at the top of the flagpole, was the Jamaican flag. And some distance below it was the British Union Jack. And as the 3 medal winners turned to face the flags, they all stood at attention to the playing of the Jamaica anthem. This event, for me, was symbolic of the strength, talent, and worth of the masses of the Jamaican people. The same masses who produced Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and before him, Sam Sharp, Warrior Queen Nanny, and Paul Bogle. The same masses that produced Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, Jimmy Cliff, Toots Hibbert, and the phenomena known as reggae music and Rastafari culture or liberty. When the black and brown nations and peoples of the world look to Jamaica for inspiration and leadership, what symbol should they see at the apex, at the top of the constitutional structure of the nation? You tell me. This is an urgent question that you, the Jamaican people, must answer for yourselves. And it is important that you answer it not only positively and progressively, but that you answer it with utmost unanimity, with unity. Jamaica cannot afford any division or disunity on the issue of removing the Queen and becoming a republic. And I will tell you why. In the case of Barbados, all that was required of us to amend the Constitution and remove the Queen was a 2/3 majority vote in the Barbados Parliament. But for you in Jamaica, not only do you need a 2/3 majority vote in Parliament, but you also have to go through a referendum of the people. And this will call for unity, political maturity, and a sense of patriotic duty by all relevant parties in Jamaica. Let me conclude by observing that when Barbados made its transition to Republican status, Barbados became the 39th former British colony that had removed the Queen from the position of head of state and taken possession of its full sovereignty. The other 38 nations include, this is the company that Barbados is in. The other 38 nations include all of the relevant African nations: Ghana, Botswana, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Mauritius. It includes all of the relevant Asian nations: India, Singapore, Malaysia, Sri Lanka. It includes the relevant European nations of Malta and Cyprus. It includes the relevant Pacific Ocean nations. Truth be told, of the 54 Commonwealth countries, only 14 continue to hold on to the British monarchy as their head of state. And these are two microstates by the name of Tuvalu and Solomon Islands. Very, very tiny countries. One very underdeveloped country by the name of Papua New Guinea. And then you have the three predominantly white Anglo-Saxon nations of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. They are Britain's kith and kin, by and large, so perhaps you could understand their position. The only other countries that are holding on are the 8 CARICOM nations, the largest and oldest and most experienced of which by far is Jamaica. I began this address with a quotation from Marcus Garvey, and I think I should end it with another quotation from my host, the Irie FM station, and it is, "Time come, remove the Queen and all remnants of colonialism." I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, man, I tell you. I tell you. Yes, brethren.